The official report says presumed fatal. But how can a plane simply vanish without a single piece of wreckage? Frederick Valentich's disappearance defies all logic. From his strange final words to the lack of a flight plan, this case is riddled with unsettling gaps. Tonight, we explore the theories and why none of them fully add up. The Australian Department of Transport closed Valentich's case with 2 words: presumed fatal. It's the bureaucratic stamp applied when no body or wreckage surfaces, not because they know what happened, but because time has passed without answers. In aviation investigations, this isn't unusual. Planes vanish over oceans or remote terrain more often than most realize. But Valentich's case feels different. No distress call, no radar trace, just silence where there should have been debris. Imagine the frustrated investigators staring at empty maps. They coordinated one of Australia's largest aerial searches at the time, covering 1,000 square miles of Bass Strait. The RAAF deployed a P-3 Orion with advanced sensors, while civilian pilots scanned the water surface. Yet after 7 days, they found nothing, not even an oil slick. Experts note how quickly ocean currents disperse debris, but Valentich's Cessna 182 had brightly colored wingtips designed to stand out against water. Other disappearances offer unsettling parallels. In 1947, a British South American Airways flight vanished near the Andes with 11 on board. Searchers found no trace until a farmer stumbled upon wreckage decades later. In 1969, Gloria Ramirez's twin-engine plane disappeared over the Gulf of Mexico. Despite an eyewitness seeing it descend, the wreck was never recovered. These cases share haunting similarities: competent pilots, good weather, and an abrupt cutoff from radar or radio contact. Aviation forensic specialists admit their tools have limits. Without a black box signal or radar data, reconstructing a flight's final moments relies on speculation. One investigator described it as connecting dots where half are missing. The official report on Valentich acknowledges this, listing possible disorientation as a cause while noting the absence of proof. Meteorologists confirmed calm conditions that night, making weather-related crashes unlikely. Family members rejected the findings. Valentich's father publicly criticized the presumption of fatality, arguing it prematurely halted further searches. Private investigators later claimed satellite imagery showed an unidentified object near Valentich's last coordinates, but authorities dismissed it as inconsequential. The department stood by its conclusion despite the gaps, stating standard protocol required closing cases after exhausting leads. Tonight, that report sits in archives, its pages filled with hesitant language. Possibly, presumably, no evidence to confirm. The unsatisfying closure lingers like fog over Bass Strait, obscuring more than it reveals. What makes this case endure isn't the conclusion, but how effortlessly it unravels when you pull any loose thread. No rushed answers tonight, just questions that still hover unanswered 40 years later. Valentich told air traffic control he was flying to King Island for a quick training exercise, a routine hop across Bass Strait. The small island barely warranted a flight plan under Australian aviation rules at the time. Yet details unravel upon closer inspection. He mentioned collecting passengers there, but King Island's airport had no record of any expected arrivals. No friends or associates recalled plans to meet him. Even his father admitted Frederick never mentioned the trip beforehand. Standard procedure required pilots to file detailed flight plans for cross-water journeys, especially after sunset. Valentich submitted only the basics: departure point, estimated time en route, and vague coordinates. Investigators later noted he carried minimal fuel for island hopping, enough for the direct route, but leaving little margin for error. Fellow pilots found this odd. Bass Strait's notoriously shifting weather demanded cautious planning. What looked like oversight might have been intention. Family recollections add layers. Valentich's sister recalled him studying UFO literature in preceding weeks, once joking about joining them if aliens ever landed. His flight instructor noted his fascination with aviation anomalies, though nothing suggested recklessness. The day before disappearing, he asked a friend about emergency procedures over water. Odd for someone planning a simple training run. There were whispers among investigators of a possible diversion, but no evidence surfaced of alternate destinations or hidden agendas. Navigation experts highlight red flags. Valentich's stated flight path would have taken him southwest toward King Island, yet radar, patchy but operational, showed no clear track in that direction. His radio transmissions placed him southeast of his reported position, near Cape Otway. Pilots familiar with the route question why he'd fly that far off course unless disoriented or deliberately deviating. The Cessna 182's instruments were later confirmed operational, ruling out equipment failure. Possible motives flicker at the edges. Some speculate Valentich staged his disappearance, though no financial pressures or personal strife emerged. Others suggest a psychological break, citing his erratic radio exchanges, but his calm initial transmissions and methodical flight prep contradict this. The most unsettling theory involves his alleged request days earlier for a high-altitude oxygen mask, unnecessary for his planned low-altitude routes, hinting at undisclosed ambitions. Official records show Valentich logged just 150 total flight hours, barely meeting the threshold for solo cross-strait flights. His instructor had cautioned against overconfidence weeks earlier, yet here he was, embarking on a twilight journey with no clear purpose. Fellow aviators described the disconnect between his experience and the risks he seemingly took. The flight plan's inconsistencies resist tidy explanations. No evidence confirms sabotage or foul play, yet the gaps nag like an itch. Why file a plan at all if the destination was fictitious? Why mention non-existent passengers? Aviation authorities deemed these quirks irrelevant post-disappearance, focusing instead on search efforts. But the questions cling like salt fog on wingtips, persistent, corrosive, impossible to ignore. Tonight, King Island sits quiet under the same stars Valentich might have navigated by. Its airstrip remains unchanged, still without logs confirming his intended arrival. The flight plan exists as both record and riddle, a trail that leads nowhere concrete. Imagine holding that single sheet of paper, its typed lines so ordinary, its implications so vast. The truth might lie not in what it says, but in what it deliberately doesn't. Standard procedure would have kept him safe. Checklists exist for a reason. Yet here we are, decades later, still tracing the ghost of a route that never made sense. Not reckless enough to suggest suicide, not logical enough to be routine. Just another unanswered question in a case defined by them. No rushed judgments tonight, just the faint echo of a young pilot's voice on the radio, insisting he was going somewhere he likely never intended to reach. The radio transmission lasts barely 4 minutes, Frederick Valentich's voice remains calm at first, professional even. Then something shifts. At 7:06 p.m., he reports an unusual aircraft trailing him at high speed. Melbourne Flight Service asks for clarification. Valentich's response fractures into confusion. It's not an aircraft. The words hang in the silence that follows. Aviation experts note the precise timestamps. 17 seconds pass between Valentich's first sighting report and his description of the object's movements. He describes 4 bright lights, a metallic surface, and erratic flight patterns inconsistent with known aircraft. The control tower requests standard evasion procedures: climb, turn, assess. Valentich's breathing grows audible as he struggles to maintain visual contact. Audio analysts highlight an odd detail: the absence of engine noise from the alleged pursuer. Military jets or civilian planes would register distinct acoustic signatures. Instead, only Valentich's Cessna hums in the background. Some speculate he misinterpreted celestial phenomena. That evening, the Mount Stromlo Observatory recorded a meteor shower, yet witnesses on the ground reported no unusual sightings at Valentich's coordinates. The transmission fractures further. At 7:11 p.m., Valentich's voice tightens as he describes the object hovering above him. Then comes the infamous line, "It's approaching from due east towards me. It seems to be playing some sort of game." His phrasing strikes investigators as oddly passive. Unlike standard pilot terminology for evasion, specialists in aviation communications note pilots typically use precise directional and speed references during threats. Valentich's language drifts into vagueness. Recordings reveal a 22-second gap after his final transmission, an eerie silence before the control tower's unanswered calls. Radio technicians confirm no interference or equipment failure could explain the abrupt cutoff. The Cessna's transponder should have continued pinging even if communications failed, yet all signals ceased simultaneously. Skeptics argue this points to catastrophic mechanical failure, but it contradicts Valentich's description of a controlled, if panicked, scenario. Psychologists propose perceptual distortions. Night flights over featureless water can trigger spatial disorientation. Without horizon references, a planet or star might appear to move erratically. The giant elevator effect, where sudden climbs or drops create illusionary motion, could explain Valentich's descriptions. Yet seasoned pilots counter that even disoriented aviators rarely invent detailed narratives about pursuing craft. Ufologists focus on the green light Valentich mentions. Declassified military documents describe experimental aircraft with unconventional propulsion systems tested during that era. None match Valentich's account, but the speculation persists. Others suggest a clandestine drone, though 1978 drone technology couldn't perform the maneuvers described. The most grounded theory involves a misidentified corporate jet, except no flight plans overlaid Cape Otway airspace that evening. The transmission's authenticity faces scrutiny. Conspiracy theorists allege edits to the official recording, though forensic audio experts found no evidence of tampering. Discrepancies emerge between the tower's logs and the public transcript, minor timing variations that fuel skepticism. Investigators confirm standard procedural lags in documentation, but cannot entirely dismiss the inconsistencies. Aviation historians compare it to other mysterious final transmissions. In 1948, Captain Thomas Mantell perished chasing a silvery disk over Kentucky. In 1953, Lieutenant Felix Moncla vanished while intercepting an unidentified blip over Lake Superior. These cases share strained radio exchanges ending in abrupt silence. None provide clear answers, only patterns that resist explanation. Tonight, the recording sits in archives, crackling, finite, incomplete. Experts still debate whether it captures a tragic misunderstanding or something darker. Listen closely to those 4 minutes. Hear the professionalism fraying into uncertainty, the controlled voice giving way to confusion. The transmission leaves us with more than silence. It leaves the shape of something missing, answers that should exist but don't, explanations that almost fit but never quite settle. No definitive conclusions tonight, just a young pilot's voice fading into static, his final words bending under the weight of decades of scrutiny. Whatever passed over Frederick Valentich's wings that evening took more than a life. It took certainty itself, leaving only questions flickering like those 4 strange lights in the October sky. Base Strait swallowed Valentich's Cessna whole. Search crews scoured 1,000 square miles with military precision for 7 days straight. The RAF deployed a P-3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft equipped with radar calibrated to spot floating debris as small as oil drums. Civilian pilots joined the effort, flying low over wave tops where reflection might reveal metallic wreckage. Surface vessels dragged sonar arrays through depths reaching 300 feet. They found nothing. Not a seat cushion, not a fuel cap, not even the aircraft's distinctive neon wingtip markers designed specifically for water visibility. Oceanographers later mapped the search area's currents. Bass Strait acts like a liquid conveyor belt with water moving up to 4 knots in complex eddies. A sinking aircraft might scatter debris across miles within hours. But the Cessna 182 had buoyant components, wing fuel tanks, sealed compartments that should have surfaced. Search teams routinely recover floating wreckage weeks after crashes. Yet, Valentich's plane left no trace. Investigators noted this was particularly unusual given the aircraft's bright orange paint scheme and aluminum construction. Similar disappearances haunt aviation records. In 1962, a Lockheed L-1049 vanished between Guam and the Philippines with 107 people aboard. Searchers covered 144,000 square miles without locating the wreck. In 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared with 239 passengers, triggering the most expensive aerial search in history. Both cases share eerie parallels with Valentich's: sudden loss of contact, no distress signals, and search areas that yielded nothing definitive. Experts suggest these vanishings reveal uncomfortable truths about ocean surveillance gaps and radar limitations. Modern search specialists explain the challenges. Water absorbs radar signals, making small aircraft disappear from scopes at low altitudes. Satellite tracking wasn't available in 1978, leaving ground radar as the only surveillance method. The closest radar station to Valentich's last known position had a 40 nautical mile range, creating blind spots where altitude fluctuations could hide a descending plane. Current underwater search technology relies on acoustic pings from flight recorders, but Valentich's Cessna carried no black box. Australian regulations didn't require them for private aircraft. Questions linger about the search methodology. The initial response focused southwest of Cape Otway, aligned with Valentich's stated flight path. Yet his radio transmission suggested possible position errors. He reported seeing lights beneath him when radar placed him over open water. Some argue search coordinators should have prioritized areas matching his verbal descriptions rather than his planned route. Australian authorities maintain they covered all plausible scenarios, though privately, some searchers admitted frustration over the lack of leads. The seabed itself complicates recovery efforts. Bass Strait's floor contains canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, with strong currents shaping shifting sand dunes that can bury wreckage. Underwater visibility rarely exceeds 30 feet, and saltwater corrosion eats aluminum rapidly. Still, larger components like engines or landing gear typically endure for decades. The 2007 discovery of a World War II aircraft near Papua New Guinea proved even small planes leave identifiable debris fields after 60 years underwater. Critics highlight another oddity: no fuel slick. The Cessna carried 170 liters of aviation gasoline, which creates visible sheens when leaked. Helicopter crews specifically watched for rainbow patterns indicating fuel discharge, but observed none. Forensic analysts note fuel spills occur in over 90% of water crashes, either from ruptured tanks or intentional dumping before ditching. The absence suggests either extremely rapid sinking or something more unsettling: that the plane never actually entered the water. Bass Strait has reclaimed ships for centuries. The 1859 wreck of the SS Admella scattered survivors across the strait for 8 days before rescue. Most died within sight of land. More recently, the 1995 disappearance of fisherman Ben Kuhl aboard his 28-foot boat resulted in an equally fruitless search. Locals described the strait's waters as deceptive, with rogue waves and sudden weather shifts that catch even experienced mariners off guard. Tonight, the seabed keeps its secrets. Modern sonar scans occasionally conducted by marine researchers have yet to reveal any aircraft-shaped anomalies in the search zone. Private investigators periodically announce plans to renew the hunt, using advanced side-scan technology, but funding always falters before missions launch. What remains is the stubborn fact of absence. A 7-meter aircraft should not disappear without leaving traces. Yet Valentich's Cessna did just that, challenging every assumption about how thoroughly we can track objects in our own atmosphere. 6 months after the disappearance, a fisherman combing Flinders Island's northeastern beach found a piece of curved metal half buried in tidal debris. The artifact measured roughly 40 centimeters long, a hinged aluminum panel, later identified as a cowl flap from a Cessna 182. The discovery sent investigators scrambling. Here, finally, might be physical evidence linking to Valentich's vanished aircraft. But closer inspection revealed complications. Experts noted the part serial number had degraded beyond recognition, leaving no way to definitively match it to Valentich's plane. Cowl flaps regulate engine cooling by opening vents near the propeller. In a crash, they typically detach upon water impact due to their vulnerable mounting points. Yet the Flinders Island specimen showed no saltwater corrosion patterns expected after months submerged. Current modeling suggested debris from Valentich's last known position would drift northwest, away from Flinders Island. The timing raised questions. Fishermen and park rangers regularly patrolled the area where the cowl flap surfaced. None reported seeing it during earlier sweeps. One theory suggests storms displaced it from a hidden debris field, but meteorologists found no severe weather that could account for sudden movement in the preceding weeks. Another possibility, that it came from a different wreck entirely, couldn't be discounted. Australian aviation records listed 17 Cessna 182s lost in coastal regions between 1960 to 1978. Aviation forensic specialists analyzed the parts' wear patterns. The hinge mechanism showed minimal scoring, indicating limited use before detachment, consistent with Valentich's relatively new aircraft. Paint samples matched his plane's color scheme, but the same factory finish appeared on hundreds of Cessnas. Curiously, the interior surface bore faint scratches resembling tool marks, as if someone had hastily removed identification plating. Australian Transport Safety Bureau investigators deemed this inconclusive, noting beach sand could have caused the abrasions. Local folklore added layers. Island residents spoke of finding airplane fragments for decades, rusted bolts near Cameron Inlet in 1962, a seat spring near Patriarch Beach in 1971. None were conclusively traced to crashes. The Cowl Flaps discovery site sat near an old wartime airstrip used for emergency landings, inviting speculation about forgotten accidents. Aviation historians confirmed 3 undocumented plane disappearances near Flinders Island between 1940 and 1955, though records were too sparse for comparison. Search teams revisited the area after the discovery, scouring beaches and offshore shallows. They found no supporting debris, no wiring bundles, no upholstery fragments, no propeller parts that should accompany a catastrophic breakup. Marine salvage experts estimate a Cessna 182 would scatter at least 200 detectable pieces across a crash zone. The solitary cowl flap defied expectations, resembling less a crash artifact than something deliberately placed. Private investigators floated alternate explanations. One suggested Valentich staged the part's discovery to support UFO narratives he'd allegedly discussed. Another proposed the flap broke off mid-flight during an unreported mechanical issue, drifting separately from the main wreck. Neither theory explained why no other debris emerged. Authorities eventually shelved inquiries, labeling the find of uncertain origin in case files. The flap itself disappeared into storage at Moorabbin Airport, forgotten until journalists rediscovered it during a 1995 retrospective. Today, the cowl flap exists as a phantom clue, something that should provide answers but only deepens questions. Imagine holding that aluminum curve, its edges smoothed by tides, its surface still flecked with orange paint. It feels like proof until you examine it closely. Then it becomes another riddle. Marine biologists note that Flinders Island beaches accumulate unusual items: Antarctic ice fragments, Japanese fishing floats, even messages in bottles decades old. The flap could simply be another vagrant object, misdirecting those desperate for resolution. The timing of its appearance troubles researchers most. Why surface months after the disappearance? Why in that isolated location? Ocean current maps show Flinders Island sits at the convergence point of 3 major drift patterns, where objects from disparate origins sometimes collect. But calculations indicated debris from Valentich's projected crash site would have reached Tasmania's western coast first. Tonight, the cowl flap's legacy isn't evidence but absence, the way it presented hope of closure before evaporating into uncertainty. Officials treated it as a footnote rather than a breakthrough, perhaps because acknowledging its ambiguity forced uncomfortable questions. If it wasn't from Valentich's plane, why did nothing else ever appear? And if it was, how did 6 months after the disappearance, a fisherman combing Flinders Island's northeastern beach found a piece of curved metal half buried in tidal debris. The artifact measured roughly 40 centimeters long, a hinged aluminum panel, later identified as a cowl flap from a Cessna 182. The discovery sent investigators scrambling. Here, finally, might be physical evidence linking to Valentich's vanished aircraft. But closer inspection revealed complications. Experts noted the part serial number had degraded beyond recognition, leaving no way to definitively match it to Valentich's plane. Cowl flaps regulate engine cooling by opening vents near the propeller. In a crash, they typically detach upon water impact due to their vulnerable mounting points. Yet the Flinders Island specimen showed no saltwater corrosion patterns expected after months submerged. Current modeling suggested debris from Valentich's last known position would drift northwest, away from Flinders Island. The timing raised questions. Fishermen and park rangers regularly patrolled the area where the cowl flap surfaced. None reported seeing it during earlier sweeps. One theory suggests storms displaced it from a hidden debris field, but meteorologists found no severe weather that could account for sudden movement in the preceding weeks. Another possibility, that it came from a different wreck entirely, couldn't be discounted. Australian aviation records listed 17 Cessna 182s lost in coastal regions between 1960 to 1978. Aviation forensic specialists analyzed the parts' wear patterns. The hinge mechanism showed minimal scoring, indicating limited use before detachment, consistent with Valentich's relatively new aircraft. Paint samples matched his plane's color scheme, but the same factory finish appeared on hundreds of Cessnas. Curiously, the interior surface bore faint scratches resembling tool marks, as if someone had hastily removed identification plating. Australian Transport Safety Bureau investigators deemed this inconclusive, noting beach sand could have caused the abrasions. Local folklore added layers. Island residents spoke of finding airplane fragments for decades, rusted bolts near Cameron Inlet in 1962, a seat spring near Patriarch Beach in 1971. None were conclusively traced to crashes. The cowl flap's discovery site sat near an old wartime airstrip used for emergency landings, inviting speculation about forgotten accidents. Aviation historians confirmed 3 undocumented plane disappearances near Flinders Island between 1940 and 1955, though records were too sparse for comparison. Search teams revisited the area after the discovery, scouring beaches and offshore shallows. They found no supporting debris, no wiring bundles, no upholstery fragments, no propeller parts that should accompany a catastrophic breakup. Marine salvage experts estimate a Cessna 182 would scatter at least 200 detectable pieces across a crash zone. The solitary cowl flap defied expectations, resembling less a crash artifact than something deliberately placed. Private investigators floated alternate explanations. One suggested Valentich staged the part's discovery to support UFO narratives he'd allegedly discussed. Another proposed the flap broke off mid-flight during an unreported mechanical issue, drifting separately from the main wreck. Neither theory explained why no other debris emerged. Authorities eventually shelved inquiries, labeling the find of uncertain origin in case files. The flap itself disappeared into storage at Moorabbin Airport, forgotten until journalists rediscovered it during a 1995 retrospective. Today, the cowl flap exists as a phantom clue, something that should provide answers but only deepens questions. Imagine holding that aluminum curve, its edges smoothed by tides, its surface still flecked with orange paint. It feels like proof until you examine it closely. Then it becomes another riddle. Marine biologists note that Flinders Island beaches accumulate unusual items: Antarctic ice fragments, Japanese fishing floats, even messages in bottles decades old. The flap could simply be another vagrant object, misdirecting those desperate for resolution. The timing of its appearance troubles researchers most. Why surface months after the disappearance? Why in that isolated location? Ocean current maps show Flinders Island sits at the convergence point of three major drift patterns, where objects from disparate origins sometimes collect. But calculations indicated debris from Valentich's projected crash site would have reached Tasmania's western coast first. Tonight, the cowl flap's legacy isn't evidence but absence, the way it presented hope of closure before evaporating into uncertainty. Officials treated it as a footnote rather than a breakthrough, perhaps because acknowledging its ambiguity forced uncomfortable questions. If it wasn't from Valentich's plane, why did nothing else ever appear? And if it was, how did? Aviation investigators have a term for what might have happened to Frederick Valentich: spatial disorientation. The weather illusion hypothesis suggests he misjudged his position due to night flying conditions over water. Bass Strait that evening presented classic risk factors: a dark sea blending seamlessly with the horizon, scattered cloud layers reflecting moonlight, and no ground references to maintain visual orientation. Pilots call this the leans, where inner ear sensations contradict what instruments indicate. Valentich's radio exchanges align with perceptual confusion. He reported a strange aircraft pacing him at 4,500 feet, yet radar showed no contacts. Meteorologists later confirmed Venus shone brightly that night at precisely that altitude in the western sky. The planet often triggers false sightings. In 2014, a Japan Airlines crew diverted their 747 after mistaking Venus for an approaching jet. Valentich described the object's lights as all sort of metallic, consistent with how planets appear when viewed through broken cloud layers. But contradictions emerge. His transmission mentioned the object passing over me at least 1,000 feet above, while Venus remained stationary. Investigators noted his altimeter readings fluctuated slightly before disappearance, suggesting possible instrument error. Still, experienced pilots argue spatial disorientation wouldn't explain Valentich's detailed descriptions of movement and structure. The Australian Department of Transport's meteorologist stated visibility was 19 nautical miles, good enough to distinguish celestial bodies from aircraft. Similar cases reveal how easily perception fails. In 1980, a Beechcraft Baron pilot near New Zealand reported being buzzed by a cylindrical object that vanished. Investigation determined he'd seen the setting moon distorted by atmospheric refraction. The 1957 Kinross incident involved two USAF officers chasing a radar blip over Lake Superior until their F-89 disappeared, later attributed to instrument failure during steep turns. These parallels suggest mundane explanations for extraordinary reports. Night flying compounds these risks. Human eyes struggle with depth perception in darkness, often misjudging distances by thousands of feet. Atmospheric scientist Dr. James McGaha analyzed 500 UFO reports, finding 80% involved astronomical phenomena, misinterpreted under stress. Best Strait's conditions that night, 84% humidity creating light refraction, could distort familiar objects. Pilots typically cross-check visual cues with instrumentation, but Valentich's Cessna lacked advanced avionics. His altimeter had minor calibration issues noted during maintenance checks, yet gaps remain. Valentich had flown this route before at night without incident. His training included instrument failure procedures, and he demonstrated competence during check rides. The graveyard spiral theory, where pilots subconsciously enter a descending turn, doesn't fit his radio exchanges describing level flight until the final moments. Investigators recreated the flight in simulator studies. Finding spatial disorientation alone couldn't explain all reported phenomena. Radar records complicate matters further. While no secondary target appeared, ground stations detected faint ghost echoes near Valentich's position, blips often caused by atmospheric anomalies. Some argue these could represent actual objects, though signal processing experts attribute them to temperature inversions common over water. The 2013 review by aviation analysts Magaha and Nickel concluded weather illusions explained most, but not all, observational elements. Tonight, we're left weighing probabilities. The illusion theory neatly resolves many inconsistencies: the silent radar, the metallic description, the lack of wreckage if Valentich spiraled into the sea during distraction. But it stumbles on his calm initial reports and flight experience. Imagine sitting in that cockpit, scanning the blackness for landmarks that aren't there, watching Venus flicker through clouds until it seems to pace your aircraft. Would you recognize the deception? Meteorology provides answers, but not all of them. The official report lists spatial disorientation as possible rather than probable, acknowledging lingering doubts. Fellow pilots who flew Bass Strait that night reported no unusual sightings, though none matched Valentich's exact route or timing. Instrument checks after the disappearance found his altimeter drift fell within permissible limits, unlikely to cause catastrophic error. We're left with an enduring paradox. The weather illusion theory explains much about Valentich's disappearance, yet fails to account for every detail. It's plausible he mistook celestial phenomena for an aircraft, but less clear why this led to total vanishing. Pilot accounts confirm spatial disorientation usually causes recognizable crash patterns, steep dives or spiral patterns leaving concentrated debris. The complete absence of wreckage nudges us toward other possibilities. No rushed conclusions tonight. Just the image of a young pilot staring into featureless night, his instruments telling one story while his eyes insist on another. Science shows how easily perception betrays us, yet some inconsistencies resist even the most logical explanations. The weather might explain what Valentich saw, but perhaps not everything that happened afterward. That distinction keeps this case alive, not as a mystery, but as a cautionary tale about the limits of certainty. The graveyard spiral kills more pilots than mechanical failure. It begins subtly, a slight bank that goes uncorrected. The inner ear misreads the tilt as level flight while the plane keeps tightening its turn. Without visual references, pilots often pull back on the yoke, steepening the descent. Within minutes, the aircraft corkscrews into the ground at near vertical angles. Investigators studying Valentich's case noted how closely his final transmissions matched this deadly sequence. His last radio exchanges describe unexplained movements, passing over me, ascending, moving fast. The Cessna 182's design makes it susceptible to spatial disorientation, with a high wing blocking downward visibility. When Valentich reported the strange aircraft above him, he might have been seeing his own wingtip navigation lights reflecting off clouds. Aviation safety records show this illusion causes countless false collision reports each year. McGaha and Nichols' 2013 analysis reconstructed probable flight dynamics. If Valentich entered a descending turn while distracted by perceived threats, his speed would increase as the spiral tightened. The final metallic scraping sounds heard on radio could match wingtip vortices at high angles of attack. Simulation models showed a Cessna 182 could descend from 4,500 feet to sea level in under 3 minutes under these conditions, consistent with the timeline between Valentich's last transmission and radio silence. Yet the theory falters on wreckage distribution. Graveyard spirals typically leave concentrated debris fields within 100 meters. Search teams found nothing across extended search grids. Oceanographers note Bass Strait's currents should have surfaced buoyant components within weeks. The 1979 disappearance of a Beechcraft Baron near Tasmania followed nearly identical spiral dynamics, yet rescuers recovered floating wreckage within 48 hours. Instrument records offer conflicting clues. Valentich's altimeter reportedly showed minor fluctuations earlier that evening, but nothing suggesting catastrophic failure. The Cessna's turn coordinator, critical for spatial orientation, had passed inspection 2 weeks prior. Experienced pilots argue spatial disorientation rarely affects communication skills, yet Valentich remained articulate until the final seconds. Parallel cases revealed troubling patterns. In 1999, a Piper Cherokee pilot over Lake Michigan reported unidentified lights before crashing in a steep spiral. Investigators determined he'd mistaken shoreline lights for aircraft while descending. The wreckage surfaced immediately. Valentich's case reverses this: ample communication, but no physical evidence. Tonight, we're left weighing probabilities. The spiral theory explains the radio transcript's progression from confusion to crisis. It accounts for the lack of corroborating radar contacts. But it struggles with the total absence of wreckage that should accompany such crashes. Imagine that final descent, mistaking reflections for pursuit, instinctively banking away until the sea claimed both plane and pilot. The scenario feels plausible until you realize similar accidents always leave traces. Aviation investigators call this the Swiss cheese model, multiple failures lining up perfectly to cause disaster. For Valentich, that might mean marginal weather conditions coinciding with instrument limitations and human perceptual flaws. The official report lists spatial disorientation as possible rather than probable, acknowledging gaps in evidence. Modern pilots train extensively on instrument flight rules to prevent such scenarios. But in 1978, the techniques were less emphasized. What lingers isn't doubt about the graveyard spiral's dangers, but whether it explains everything that happened that night. The sea keeps its secrets well. We have a plausible narrative supported by science and precedent, yet still missing that crucial physical confirmation. No closure tonight, just the image of spiraling altimeter needles and a radio going silent mid-sentence, leaving us to wonder how much we'll never truly know. Valentich's final transmission about an unidentified aircraft launched decades of UFO speculation. His descriptions, a green light, metallic shape, mirror classic abduction accounts. Ufologists point to his reported fascination with extraterrestrials, noting he'd mentioned UFOs to friends weeks earlier. The case drew international attention when Australian researcher Bill Chalker uncovered military documents showing unusual radar returns that night. Skeptics counter with logical explanations. The timing coincides with a documented meteor shower, observed by Canberra's Mount Stromlo Observatory. Witnesses reported bright celestial phenomena across southeastern Australia within hours of Valentich's disappearance. Astronomers note that green fireballs occur when nickel-rich meteors enter the atmosphere, precisely matching his descriptions. Radar operators often detect meteor trails as false contacts, explaining the military's unverified blips. The radio transcript reveals unsettling details. Valentich described the object pacing him, then hovering above his plane, behavior inconsistent with meteors. He reported engine troubles concurrent with the sighting, a detail recurring in alleged UFO encounters. Investigators later found his aircraft had no mechanical issues during routine maintenance checks. UFO researchers cite this as potential evidence of electromagnetic interference from unknown sources. Physical evidence remains elusive. No verified photographs or debris support extraterrestrial involvement. The Australian government denies possessing classified documents about the incident, though some files remain redacted. Private investigators claim remote sensing detected an unexplained underwater anomaly near Valentich's last coordinates, but marine surveys found nothing conclusive. Case parallels exist. Pilot Frederick Valentich shares eerie similarities with aviator Bruce Gernon, who reported entering an electromagnetic tunnel over the Bermuda Triangle in 1970. Both described unusual atmospheric conditions preceding their encounters. Unlike Valentich, Gernon survived to document his experience. His Boeing 36's clocks reportedly showed a 28-minute time discrepancy post-flight. The meteorological record complicates matters. While the MT Stromlo observations confirm celestial activity, witnesses near Cape Otway reported stationary lights matching Valentich's timeline. These accounts came from trained observers, lighthouse keepers and ship captains, but their credibility remains debated. Scientists suggest unusual atmospheric refraction could explain the sightings without invoking extraterrestrials. Psychologists offer alternative interpretations. Valentich's age and experience level fit a profile prone to perceptual errors. His multiple references to the object's movements suggest possible pareidolia, the tendency to perceive patterns in random stimuli. The stress of night flying over water might have amplified this effect, particularly given his admitted UFO interest prior to the flight. Official investigations dismissed the UFO angle. The Department of Transport's final report made no mention of unidentified aircraft despite witness accounts. Declassified documents reveal investigators privately considered psychological factors more likely than extraterrestrial ones. This stance hasn't stopped ongoing speculation. Private UFO research groups continue listing Valentich's case as unsolved. Tonight, the theory persists in aviation lore. Modern ufologists still reference microphone interference patterns on Valentich's final transmission as possible evidence of energy fields. Aerospace engineers counter that radio static commonly occurs during aircraft maneuvers. The debate ultimately circles back to that metallic voice describing abnormal lights, a testimony preserved while its speaker vanished. Whatever the truth, Valentich's disappearance remains a Rorschach test, yielding different images depending on who's looking. No definitive answers, just a young pilot's baffled voice forever asking Melbourne Flight Service about something that shouldn't have been there. The media transformed Valentich's disappearance from a missing persons case into an enduring mystery. Documentaries like Unsolved Mysteries framed it as a potential abduction, emphasizing his cryptic final words about an unidentified aircraft. True crime podcasts like The Vanished took a different approach, focusing on his personal background and the flight's logistical inconsistencies. Each retelling adds layers of interpretation, blending verified facts with unanswered questions. Television specials often amplify eerie details. A 1990 Australian broadcast reenacted the radio transmission with dramatic pauses and echoing effects, casting Valentich's voice as increasingly panicked, a departure from the calm tone recorded in official transcripts. YouTube documentaries frequently pair his audio with flashing UFO imagery, suggesting extraterrestrial involvement despite lacking evidence. These choices shape public perception, steering audiences toward supernatural explanations over aviation hazards. Podcasts reveal how framing alters understanding. The Vanished episode, titled The Pilot Who Vanished, spent 20 minutes detailing Valentich's flight training before mentioning UFOs. Host Marissa Jones emphasized mundane possibilities, mechanical failure, disorientation, while acknowledging his interest in UFOs as background context. Compare this to Mysteries Abound, which opened with eerie synthesizer music and focused solely on alien theories. The same facts, filtered through different narrators, become entirely different stories. Print media follows similar patterns. Newspapers in 1978 initially reported the disappearance factually, but tabloids soon featured headlines like "Pilot Snatched by UFOs." These pieces often omitted key context, like the meteor shower that night, to heighten mystery. Even reputable outlets increasingly emphasized the extraterrestrial angle as public fascination grew. Over time, the narrative shifted from missing pilot to possible alien encounter, without new evidence emerging. Experts note how media sustains mysteries through selective emphasis. Dr. Sarah McCormick, a folklore researcher, observes that cases like Valentich's thrive when details resist clear resolution. Podcast hosts and documentary makers return to them because audiences crave stories that linger in ambiguity. The lack of wreckage becomes a blank screen for projection, where some see proof of UFOs, others see limitations in search technology. Social media amplifies speculation. Reddit threads parse the radio transcript line by line, with users debating whether a faint background noise resembles engine trouble or alien interference. TikTok videos overlay sonar maps, with flashing dots labeled potential UFO trajectory. These platforms thrive on engagement, rewarding theories that inspire debate rather than consensus. Yet media attention also preserves important questions. Without documentaries prompting renewed interest, Valentich's case might have faded like hundreds of other missing aircraft reports. The balance between fact and fiction remains delicate. Each retelling risks distorting details while ensuring the mystery isn't forgotten. Tonight, consider how the story changes based on who tells it. A technical report lists dry facts, flight plan irregularities, radar limitations, meteorological data. A paranormal documentary highlights the metallic description and missing wreckage. Both might use the same audio clips, but leave you with entirely different impressions. Valentich's disappearance persists not just because of what happened, but because media keeps reshaping what we think might have happened. No definitive answers, just an ongoing conversation where each version of the story reveals as much about the teller as the event itself. The truth remains obscured not only by the sea, but by the stories we've built around it. Writers and producers know ambiguity fascinates more than closure, so the case continues, adapting to new formats while keeping its core mystery intact. What lingers is less about a single pilot's fate and more about why we can't stop searching for explanations that drift further from evidence. The official documents describe Frederick Valentich as a 20-year-old flight instructor with 150 logged hours, barely enough solo experience for cross-strait flights. His instructor noted above-average skills but occasional overconfidence in training records. Quiet and meticulous, according to friends, Valentich spent evenings studying aviation manuals at Moorabbin Airport's pilot lounge. Yet his high school transcripts reveal a different pattern: repeated struggles with mathematics and physics, subjects critical for navigation. This contradiction hints at someone determined to fly despite academic hurdles. Family accounts paint a complex portrait. His father, Guido, spoke of a son fascinated by the edges of aviation knowledge, borrowing UFO literature from the local library. Neighbors recalled him pointing at night skies, claiming to spot unusual lights. But flight school peers remember a disciplined student who avoided wild speculation. This duality, methodical pilot versus UFO enthusiast, creates tension in understanding his final flight. His sister later mentioned he joked about joining them if they ever land, though she couldn't say if he meant it seriously. Financial pressures may have influenced his decisions. Valentich worked part-time at an electronics store to fund flight hours, sometimes skipping meals to afford fuel. Fellow pilots noted his frugal habits, reusing navigation charts, minimizing unnecessary flights. This contrasts with his decision to embark on an expensive night flight without clear purpose. Investigators later found no evidence he carried cargo or passengers who might have offset costs, making the trip's economics puzzling. Personality assessments from flight school describe someone eager to prove himself. At 20, Valentich was younger than most commercial pilot candidates, possibly fueling his ambition. Friends said he meticulously recorded every flight in a leather-bound logbook, yet the entries contained odd notes about atmospheric disturbances near Bass Strait. These details blur the line between careful documentation and growing fixation on anomalies. His final weeks raise unanswered questions. Colleagues reported Valentich asking unusual technical questions, once inquiring about oxygen masks for high-altitude flights far beyond his plane's capabilities. Another time, he borrowed manuals on emergency water landings despite having no planned overwater routes. These scattered clues resist easy interpretation. Reasonable preparation, or signs of someone planning something beyond a routine flight. The night before disappearing, Valentich phoned a Melbourne UFO researcher, though the conversation's content remains unknown. His roommate mentioned seeing him study star charts instead of planned navigation routes. These fragments suggest mounting preoccupations that may or may not connect to his fate. Officials later dismissed them as irrelevant, but they linger as ghostly echoes behind the official record. Tonight, we're left with more questions than insights. The disciplined pilot and the UFO enthusiast seem like two different people, yet they coexisted in one young man. His background doesn't explain the disappearance. It simply shows how human complexity defies simple narratives. Perhaps that's why this case endures. Not because of what vanished that night, but because of who vanished, and how little we understand the person behind the mystery. No definitive conclusions here, just the uneasy sense that even those closest to him couldn't predict what happened when his plane slipped into the darkness. Valentich filed a flight plan showing a direct route from Moorabbin to King Island, a 140 nautical mile trip across Bass Strait. The path should have taken him southwest over Cape Otway before crossing open water. Yet radio transcripts place him southeast of his reported position, with radar returns showing no clear track along his planned course. This disconnect raises questions about his actual flight path that night. Bass Strait poses unique navigation challenges. The shallow waters create unpredictable weather patterns with sudden fog banks obscuring landmarks. Without visual references, pilots rely heavily on instruments, but Valentich's Cessna carried only basic VOR navigation equipment. Aviation charts from 1978 show sparse radio beacons in the area, leaving extended stretches where pilots must fly by dead reckoning. Even slight course deviations could send aircraft miles off track without the pilot realizing. Experts note multiple anomalies in Valentich's reported movements. His initial radio contact placed him near Cape Otway right on schedule. Minutes later, he described his position as southeast of the Cape, a shift that should have required a sharp course change. Air traffic control recorded his final transmission, originating from an area with no radar coverage, approximately 25 nautical miles west of his last verified position. This placement suggests either significant navigational errors or intentional deviation. The lack of radar confirmation deepens the mystery. Ground radar at Melbourne Airport tracked Valentich initially, but coverage ended about 50 miles southwest of Cape Otway. Military radar detected sporadic returns further out, but these couldn't be definitively linked to his aircraft. Investigators later determined atmospheric conditions that night could cause radar ducting, false returns created by temperature inversions over water. This leaves Valentich's true path across the strait impossible to verify. Navigation specialists highlight another inconsistency. Valentich reported cruising at 4,500 feet, an unusual altitude for that route. Most pilots opt for 6,500 or 8,500 feet to improve radio range and fuel efficiency. His chosen altitude placed him squarely in a layer of scattered clouds, reducing visibility while offering no operational advantages. Flight instructors familiar with Bass Strait crossings consider this choice perplexing for an ostensibly routine training flight. Geographic factors complicate search efforts. The strait's seafloor features submarine canyons plunging to 300 feet, with strong currents that could disperse wreckage quickly. If Valentich strayed from his planned path, he might have entered areas beyond the initial search grid. Oceanographers note debris could have drifted northwest toward Tasmania, rather than the expected northeast direction, potentially explaining why the cowl flap surfaced where it did. The flight path mystery endures because every plausible explanation creates new questions. If Valentich became disoriented, why didn't he follow standard emergency procedures? If he intentionally changed course, what was the destination? The official investigation could only conclude the aircraft likely went down somewhere along an indeterminate path across Bass Strait. No flight data recorder existed to clarify matters, just fading radar blips and a pilot's increasingly confused transmissions. Tonight, we're left reconstructing a journey with half the pieces missing. Imagine tracing that tentative line across a navigation chart, knowing it represents someone's last known movements. The planned route seems so straightforward on paper, a simple arc from mainland to island. Yet somehow, in the darkness over restless waters, that predictable path became something else entirely. Whether through error, intention, or circumstances beyond understanding, Frederick Valentich's flight veered from the expected course into permanent mystery. No satisfying explanations here, just coordinates on a map marking where certainty ends and speculation begins. The search for Valentich's Cessna began immediately after his final radio transmission. The Royal Australian Air Force scrambled a P-3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft equipped with advanced radar and sonar systems capable of detecting submerged objects. Civilian pilots joined the effort, flying low-altitude visual searches across the choppy waters of Bass Strait. Together, they formed one of Australia's largest coordinated air searches at the time, covering over 1,000 square miles of open ocean. Yet after 7 days of concentrated effort, they found nothing. No floating debris, no oil slick, no signs of wreckage. The search area presented extraordinary challenges. Bass Strait is notorious for its shallow sandbanks and sudden weather changes that can scatter debris across hundreds of square miles. Ocean currents there move unpredictably, with strong tidal flows capable of pulling objects beneath the surface. Search coordinators later estimated the Cessna's wreckage could have drifted up to 25 miles per day in those conditions, expanding the potential recovery zone exponentially. Even with military-grade equipment, spotting a small aircraft in those waters was like searching for a single grain of sand on a windswept beach. Historical comparisons highlight the difficulty. In 1969, a DC-3 disappeared near Port Phillip Bay with 18 aboard. Despite months of searching, only a single seat cushion was recovered. Another case from 1986 involved a light aircraft vanishing near Tasmania's west coast. Searchers found no trace until lobster fishermen discovered the wreck embedded in seabed sediment 15 years later. These cases demonstrate how ocean environments conceal aircraft with frustrating efficiency, especially in areas with shifting sand bottoms like Bass Strait. Technology played both hero and villain in the search. The RAF's P-3 Orion could scan vast areas using side-looking radar, but the equipment had blind spots at low altitudes where small debris might float. Sonar arrays dragged by surface ships could detect large objects underwater, but the Cessna's aluminum frame might not produce strong enough sonar returns. Search crews faced constant equipment limitations, radar signals weakening with distance, sonar images blurring in turbulent waters, visual searches hampered by sunlight reflection on wave crests. Questions linger about whether searchers looked in the right places. Initial efforts focused southwest of Cape Otway, following Valentich's stated flight path. But radio transcripts suggest he may have strayed southeast into less charted waters. Some argue search coordinators placed too much faith in the original flight plan, rather than accounting for possible navigation errors. Declassified documents reveal military radar briefly detected an unidentified contact moving eastward before vanishing, a lead never fully pursued due to uncertain coordinates. The search's failure haunts investigators to this day. Veteran pilots who participated describe staring at featureless blue water for hours, knowing the odds of spotting wreckage diminished with each passing minute. Modern satellite analysis shows search crews missed several underwater anomalies that could represent debris fields, areas now impossible to confirm without physical inspection. The official conclusion simply states the aircraft was not located, leaving open whether it went down inside or outside the search perimeter. Tonight, we're left with silent sonar screens and empty horizon lines. Imagine those search pilots banking low over whitecaps, scanning for any irregular shape amid endless waves. They chased faint radar ghosts and false sonar echoes while Valentich's disappearance slipped further from reach. The most advanced technology of 1978 proved inadequate against Bass Strait's vastness, a humbling reminder of how much ocean remains beyond our sight. No wreckage found, no definitive answers, just the lingering question of whether they were searching in the right places at all. Valentich's radio transmissions described something that shouldn't have been there, an unidentified aircraft, pacing his Cessna at 4,500 feet. His words paint a strange picture. Long shape, metal, green light. The object allegedly matched his maneuvers before vanishing. Radar showed no other aircraft in the area. This discrepancy lies at the heart of the mystery. Either the equipment failed to detect something present, or Valentich misinterpreted natural phenomena as a pursuing craft. Aviation experts analyzed his descriptions point by point. The metallic shine could match Venus reflecting off scattered clouds that night. Weather records show broken cloud cover at that altitude. His reports of the object hovering above might describe an optical illusion caused by his own aircraft's movements. When a plane banks subtly, fixed light sources like stars appear to move relative to the cockpit, a well-documented illusion called autokinesis. But these explanations don't fully account for his detailed descriptions of shape and movement. The green light presents another puzzle. Venus typically appears white or yellow. Investigators initially considered aircraft navigation lights, but no flights matched Valentich's location or timeline. Some suggest atmospheric refraction could bend light unusually that night. Bass Strait's humidity levels reached 84%, potentially creating prism effects. Others point to documented meteor activity, though meteors don't pace aircraft as Valentich described. His transmission's most haunting line, "It's not an aircraft," leaves the door open for more exotic interpretations. Pilots familiar with the route note 1 overlooked possibility. Fishing boats in Bass Strait sometimes use bright green lamps to attract squid. Under certain conditions, these lights can appear airborne to pilots lacking visual references, a phenomenon called fata morgana. But Valentich specified the light came from above his altitude, not from the sea surface. Whatever he saw clearly convinced him he wasn't observing normal marine activity. Military records add complications. Declassified documents reveal unexplained radar returns in the general area that evening, brief blips dismissed as atmospheric anomalies. One retired radar technician later claimed these echoes matched patterns sometimes seen during classified aircraft tests, though no such exercises were officially scheduled. The fact remains, no verifiable evidence confirms another aircraft's presence that night beyond Valentich's testimony. The anomalous elements resist neat categorization. They're not quite explainable as natural phenomena, yet lack corroborating physical evidence. Specialists agree on one point. Valentich genuinely believed what he reported. His calm, professional tone suggests sincere confusion rather than fabrication. The transcript preserves his escalating bewilderment as he struggles to reconcile instruments with visual perception. Tonight, we're left with an impossible contradiction, detailed observations that conflict with all available data. The object Valentich described either existed outside normal detection parameters or represents a cascade of perceptual errors. Neither explanation fully satisfies. Perhaps that's why this case endures, not because of answers it provides, but because of questions that still hover unexplained over Bass Strait's dark waters. No closure tonight, just an echo of a young pilot's voice describing something that shouldn't have been there. Valentich's last confirmed position places him approximately 25 nautical miles southwest of Cape Otway, cruising at 4,500 feet over Bass Strait. His final radio transmission abruptly cut off mid-sentence while describing an unidentified aircraft above him. This location sits at the edge of Melbourne radar coverage, an invisible boundary where ground-based tracking systems lose contact with small aircraft. The coordinates were calculated using radio signal strength and timing, but investigators acknowledge margins of error spanning several miles in every direction. The area's geography complicates verification. Bass Strait's shallow seabed, averaging just 60 meters deep, creates unpredictable wind patterns that can push aircraft off course. That night, weather balloons recorded temperature inversions capable of bending radar beams downward, creating blind spots. Pilots familiar with the route note how coastline landmarks disappear quickly after departure, leaving only open water and unreliable visual references. Any position data from Valentich's last moments relies entirely on his own reports rather than independent verification. Radar limitations haunt the investigation. Primary surveillance radar at Melbourne Airport could track Valentich's transponder signal out to about 50 nautical miles before losing resolution. Secondary radar, which requires aircraft to transmit encoded responses, failed to confirm his final position. Military radar stations detected intermittent returns near the estimated location, but atmospheric interference made confirmation impossible. Modern analysts suggest these ghost echoes could have been sea clutter, false returns caused by wave patterns under specific meteorological conditions. The last plotted position contradicts Valentich's described situation. He reported the strange object hovering above him, yet radar showed empty skies. Navigation experts calculated his probable track using wind-aloft data, but the results didn't align with floating debris patterns from hypothetical crash sites. Ocean current models indicate wreckage should have drifted northeast toward Victoria's coastline, yet searches there found nothing. This mismatch between expected and observed evidence leaves the true last position uncertain. Eyewitness accounts add another layer. A fishing vessel captain reported seeing a low-flying aircraft's navigation lights west of King Island around the relevant time. Lighthouse keepers at Cape Otway noted no unusual activity. These conflicting observations stretch the possible search area another 100 nautical miles southwest, into waters never thoroughly scanned. Without radar verification, Valentich's plane could have been anywhere across thousands of square miles when contact ceased. Tonight, those coordinates on nautical charts represent less a destination than a vanishing point. Imagine staring at radar screens showing the last faint echo before static takes over. The official record lists a position, but every investigator privately acknowledges it's more estimate than fact. What lingers isn't certainty about where Valentich disappeared, but awareness of how thoroughly the sea erases tracks. No wreckage confirms the location, no debris trail marks the path. Just empty ocean and unanswered questions about those final moments when a pilot and his plane slipped beyond all observation. The last known position remains the mystery's unstable center, a dot on the map that might be correct or might be completely wrong. Search teams used it as their starting point, expanding concentric circles across Bass Strait. Yet after decades, we still don't know if they began looking in the right place. The coordinates exist less as truth than as the final fragile connection to a flight that left no other traces. No closure here, just coordinates that mark where knowledge ends and speculation begins. Valentich's family received the news with disbelief when authorities called. His father, Guido, later described pacing Moorabbin Airport's terminal, staring at empty runways while search planes roared overhead. The initial 48 hours passed in frantic activity. Phone calls to every airstrip along Bass Strait, repeated visits to the flight service station for updates. His sister, Rhonda, recalled how they kept his bedroom untouched, half expecting him to walk through the door with some logical explanation. Their frustration grew as the search wound down without answers. Guido publicly criticized the presumed fatal ruling, arguing it abandoned the possibility his son might have survived. In media interviews, he pointed out discrepancies, the unexplored flight path deviations, the unidentified radar blips. Family members hired private investigators when official inquiries closed, chasing leads that went nowhere. One investigator's report suggested satellite imagery showed an object in the strait, but authorities dismissed it as inconclusive. The family's private theories reflected their anguish. Guido sometimes speculated about hijacking, noting his son's cautious nature made reckless flying unlikely. Rhonda wondered about mechanical failure, though maintenance records showed no issues. Both rejected the UFO angle despite Valentich's casual interest in the subject. In quiet moments, they revisited old conversations, his odd questions about emergency procedures, his borrowed library books on aviation mysteries. These fragments offered no clarity, just deeper shadows around his final flight. Decades later, the unresolved loss still lingers. Guido passed away in 1999 without answers, having spent years petitioning for file reviews that revealed nothing new. Rhonda preserved his collection of news clippings, yellowed pages carefully stored in plastic sleeves. She occasionally speaks to documentarians, her voice steady, but eyes distant when recounting how her brother vanished during what should have been a routine flight. The family's persistence kept the case alive when bureaucracy moved on, their refusal to accept easy explanations echoing investigators' own doubts. Official reports offered no comfort. The Department of Transport's conclusions felt hollow without physical evidence. Guido once told a journalist, They drew lines on maps and called it an investigation, his words sharp with grief. The family's private memorial sits far from Boss Strait, a quiet Melbourne cemetery plot containing Valentich's flight manuals and logbooks, buried like artifacts of a life interrupted. Visitors sometimes leave small airplane models by the headstone. Tonight, imagine that household in October 1978. The untouched dinner plate, the silent phone, the father scanning night skies long after search teams gave up. The family's story runs parallel to the official record, both searching for answers across different landscapes. One followed radar echoes and ocean currents. The other navigated missing person forms and sleepless nights. Neither found what they sought. No resolution comforts here, just the quiet understanding that some disappearances leave wounds no report can heal. The Valentiches remind us that behind every aviation mystery are people waiting for a knock at the door that never comes. Valentich's disappearance occupies a unique space in aviation lore, not just as a mystery, but as a cultural mirror reflecting our fascination with the unexplained. Documentaries like Unsolved Mysteries revisited the case multiple times, each episode framing it slightly differently, sometimes as a cautionary tale about spatial disorientation, other times as a potential UFO encounter. The story's appeal lies in its irresolution. Unlike most crashes where wreckage offers closure, Valentich's case remains open-ended, inviting speculation. True crime podcasts dissect the transcripts with forensic detail, while paranormal shows dramatize the metallic craft descriptions. YouTube theorists overlay radio recordings with sonar maps, circling anomalies like digital detectives. The case spreads through forums and documentaries, mutating slightly with each retelling. Even aviation safety seminars reference it, not for answers, but as a case study in how perception can deceive even trained pilots. The cultural impact of a documentary. The story endures because it checks every box of an enduring mystery. 1. Accessible strangeness. Unlike technical aviation failures, Valentich's descriptions feel eerily relatable. Misunderstood instruments, confusing lights and darkness. 2. Missing evidence. The lack of wreckage creates a blank space for theories to grow. 3. Human drama. A young pilot's voice on the radio, calm then confused, anchors the mystery and emotion. References appear in unexpected places. The X-Files episode about vanishing pilots borrows elements, while Australian folk songs mention the boy who flew into the green light. The story crosses from factual reporting into folklore, gaining layers with each retelling. Urban explorers occasionally visit Moorabbin Airport, photographing Hangar 89, where Valentich kept his plane as if the walls might whisper clues. Psychologists note how such cases fill a narrative hunger. Most disappearance tales, MH370, Amelia Earhart, follow similar arcs, verified facts up front, then expanding circles of speculation. Valentich's stands out for its intimate scale. One man, one small plane, and a radio conversation froze in time. The audio recording becomes a relic, analyzed like a piece of obscure music. Some hear engine trouble in the static. Others claim faint electronic interference suggests external forces. The case also reveals how we process uncertainty. Official reports use careful language, probable cause lists, possibilities, not certainties. Yet public retellings often harden these into definitive theories. A 2014 paranormal documentary, ignored the meteor shower witnesses reported that night, while a 2020 aviation podcast skipped Valentich's UFO interests entirely. Each version serves its audience, but reshapes the facts subtly. Tonight, consider why this disappearance sticks when others fade. Maybe it's the simplicity. A single-engine plane on a short flight, vanishing mid-sentence, or the lingering sense that Valentich himself might have wondered in those final minutes what was truly happening. The cultural impact spreads beyond aviation circles, appearing in novels like The Glitch and indie films where pilots grapple with unseen forces. The case's power lies in what it doesn't provide. No wreckage to examine, no black box transcript, just a young voice describing something inexplicable before silence takes over. No grand conclusions tonight, just acknowledgement that some stories refuse resolution, staying alive precisely because they hover at the edge of understanding. That tension between known and unknown keeps Valentich's flight eternally suspended in our collective imagination, neither fully explained nor entirely dismissed. Skeptics approach Valentich's disappearance with Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is often the correct one. They point to well-documented phenomena that could account for every aspect of the case without invoking UFOs or other extraordinary causes. Spatial disorientation stands as their central argument. Aviation investigators note how easily night flights over water confuse pilots. Without visual references, the inner ear can misinterpret turns and descents. Valentich's descriptions of an object pacing him match classic symptoms of vestibular illusions, where pilots mistake stationary lights for moving craft. The radio transcript receives particular skepticism. When Valentich described a strange aircraft, skeptics suggest he likely saw Venus. That evening, the planet shone brightly at his flight altitude. Its light refracting through scattered clouds could create the metallic appearance he noted. His report of the object passing over aligns with how celestial bodies seem to shift during aircraft maneuvers. Experts cite hundreds of cases where pilots misidentified planets or stars as approaching aircraft. The eerie silence on radar supports this. No technology in 1978 could track Venus, nor would it need to. Critics dismantle UFO claims methodically. They highlight the documented meteor shower that night, which multiple astronomers observed. Green fireballs, a known meteor type, match Valentich's descriptions. His mention of engine trouble likely resulted from distraction, not actual mechanical failure. Maintenance records show his Cessna passed inspections that morning. Even the "it's not an aircraft" remark finds rational explanation. Under stress, pilots sometimes vocalize confusion before recognizing illusions. The lack of wreckage poses less mystery to skeptics. Base, straight, strong currents and deep canyons routinely swallowed debris. A 2013 study demonstrated how a crashing Cessna 182 could sink intact, avoiding surface debris. Oceanographers note similar vanishings, like the 1962 Lockheed L-1049 that disappeared with 107 aboard, still unrecovered. Skeptics argue the cowl flap found months later likely came from another crash, given its weathered condition and drift patterns. Skeptical aviation psychologists analyze Valentich's background differently. His interest in UFOs suggests confirmation bias, a tendency to interpret ambiguous events as evidence for pre-existing beliefs. Witnesses reported him discussing aliens weeks before disappearing. This doesn't prove fabrication, but indicates heightened susceptibility to misperception. His limited flight experience, 150 total hours, left him vulnerable to spatial disorientation, especially at night, over featureless ocean. Yet skeptics concede uncertainties remain. The precise crash location is unknown. Some navigation discrepancies in the flight plan resist full explanation. Their conclusion that Valentich likely succumbed to disorientation still leaves questions about why wreckage never surfaced. They dismiss extraterrestrial theories firmly, but acknowledge standard investigations rely on physical evidence that's absent here. Aviation safety expert John Green summarizes it. We know how he probably died. We just can't prove it like usual. The skeptical view offers plausible answers for each anomaly, but collectively they feel incomplete. Like assembling a puzzle with missing pieces, the picture makes sense until you notice gaps. They remind us how easily human perception fails, especially in stressful situations. Floating lights become alien craft. Engine gauges appear faulty when stared at too long, but they can't entirely explain why a competent pilot would deviate so far from protocol without realizing it, or why no trace of his plane ever emerged from the strait's depths. Tonight, skepticism provides clarity without full satisfaction. It replaces wonder with probability, trading what if for most likely. Yet the case lingers precisely because even the most grounded explanations leave room for doubt. No theory perfectly fits every detail. Perhaps that's the real lesson. Some mysteries resist clean solutions no matter how rigorously we apply logic. The ocean keeps its secrets, indifferent to our need for closure. The questions surrounding Frederick Valentich's disappearance resist easy answers, even decades later. Why did an experienced pilot file a flight plan to King Island without any record of intended passengers or business there? How could his Cessna vanish completely when similar crashes left identifiable debris? These puzzles linger because each possible explanation unravels when examined closely. Aviation experts note most vanishings at sea eventually yield some wreckage, a fuel tank, a seat cushion, but Valentich's plane left nothing. The radio transmission troubles investigators most. Valentich described an unidentified aircraft pacing him with unnerving precision, yet radar showed empty skies. Skeptics suggest visual illusions, but experienced pilots question how he could misinterpret something so clearly. The transcript captures his calm professionalism dissolving into confusion within minutes, a progression that doesn't neatly match typical spatial disorientation cases. Why did he remain articulate throughout while allegedly experiencing severe vestibular illusions? The flight path inconsistencies raise further doubts. Why did Valentich appear southeast of his reported position near Cape Otway? If lost, why didn't he follow standard lost procedure steps? Navigation specialists point out his odd choice of 4,500 feet altitude, too low for optimal radio range, yet high enough for cloud interference. These small deviations might explain his confusion, but they don't account for the complete lack of wreckage from what should have been a controlled ditching. Modern technology offers little resolution. Satellite imagery reviews show no crash site. Advanced sonar mapping of Bass Strait seabed reveals no aircraft-shaped anomalies where Valentich likely went down. Oceanographers estimate any wreck should remain identifiable for decades, yet searches find nothing. Investigators privately admit this absence contradicts most crash scenarios. Even mid-air breakups scatter debris across miles of ocean surface. Family members still question the official conclusions. Why did authorities stop searching after 7 days when other cases continued for weeks? Some point to unidentified radar returns near Valentich's last position that were never fully investigated. Declassified documents reveal internal debates about whether classified military exercises might explain these anomalies, though no such operations were confirmed that night. Psychologists studying the case note how it plays on primal fears, the competent professional vanishing during routine work. His calm transmissions make listeners unconsciously trust his perceptions, even as they conflict with physical evidence. This tension between reliable witness and impossible facts keeps the case alive in popular imagination long after other disappearances fade from memory. The greatest unanswered question may be why this case resists closure so stubbornly. Most aviation mysteries eventually yield fragments of truth through wreckage discovery or new technology. Valentich's disappearance stands apart, not just unsolved, but seemingly unsolvable given current knowledge. Experts estimate the chances of finding the wreck now at nearly zero. Yet private investigators periodically announce new searches, drawn by the case's siren call. Tonight, we're left with contradictions that refuse reconciliation. A professional pilot describing impossible events, radar screens showing nothing where something should be, an aircraft that vanished as completely as if it never existed. The ocean holds its secrets tightly, and Bass Strait keeps this one closest of all. No satisfying conclusions here, just the echo of a young pilot's voice describing lights in the darkness and our collective inability to prove what they truly were. Some mysteries don't want to be solved, and perhaps that's why we can't stop trying. Frederick Valentich's disappearance remains a hole in reality. A pilot, a plane, and a routine flight that slipped between the seams of what we understand. Skeptics and believers circle the same facts like search planes over empty ocean, never finding enough to land on certainty. The truth may be simple, a young pilot misjudging the night, or something beyond our explanations. What lingers isn't just a mystery, but a reminder of how much we still don't control in our mapped, measured world. Tonight, picture Bass Strait's dark waters holding their secret close, teaching us that some answers weren't meant to surface. Reflect on where knowledge ends